The Golden Stallion, the man of tomorrow, Sabzu, the rated R radio star, here for your March live Hangout Q&A. Now, I think I said on this week's episode of Sovryn Tech, I think I said to be Wednesday, and then things worked out in such a way, well, you'll find out about it with various Patreon content, because you patrons really get to follow my life in a lot of ways. And boy, a lot of you ask some very, very personal questions at times too, but whatever, that's fine. But you'll find out all more about that, why various things changed from what I had originally planned this weekend. But yeah, so we're doing this on Tuesday, and I know it was very short notice. I think the notice, it was supposed to go out earlier in the day yesterday, but it ended up going out like almost by midnight last night. So if not a ton of people are in for the Hangout, I totally understand, but you know how this works. You end up getting the audio for this. Granted, it's video and you can find that in the post, but you get the audio of this usually within hours of it coming out. And that'll be true today as well. So earlier today, this is actually my second time in the studio today behind the mic, because I was on Declare Your Independence with Ernest Hancock this morning. I was on between 9 and 10 a.m. We ended up talking. I'll release the audio in the Patreon feed. Obviously, anybody can go listen to it for free because it's Ernie's show. Ernie is he's a piece of work. I love Ernie. He loves me, and so he has me on here and there. I think I'm going to be on next week as well. He said he wanted to have me on to talk more stuff, but we ended up, for most of it, really, we were talking like video compression and everything, and I was just complaining about how, hey, if we didn't worry about having video, like we could already have a lot of the alternative internet, that we want, or at least that people that listen to Sovryn Tech, I think would want. And that's not a new statement for me to make, but maybe that'll be something new for his audience to hear. And he has a pretty good audience, I think. So anyway, that was a lot of fun. You can find that, I think, at freedomsphoenix.com. It's freedoms with an S. I mean, what great marketing that guy does. And I will be releasing the audio with an exclusive intro, as usual, on Patreon, probably on Thursday, because tomorrow you'll get your regular Hangout Q&A. So, and I've got some preloaded questions for this episode, but actually, and I love it when this happens, we've got, I don't mind either way it goes. It can be in the YouTube chat, like the last February's Hangout Q&A. Everybody was in the YouTube chat and they're just asking all these questions, and I'm just batting them, and answering them away as they went, pretty much stream of consciousness. That was a lot of fun. I have no problem if people just want to do it, in the YouTube chat. You're welcome to do that. Or like right now, I have somebody in the actual Hangout with me by audio. I've got Daniel with me, and Daniel, welcome again. You've been gracious enough to, and a longtime patron, and I'm honored by that. And you've been gracious enough to be on the Hangouts many times in the past. So if you want to unmute yourself, go ahead and come on, and you can ask away your pressing question.
Pressing indeed. It took 2,000 years for this question to come about.
I love it.
So this is for the good doctor. You talk a lot about what is canon, whether it's Star Trek, Star Wars, Marvel, or whatever. And honestly, those questions, I'm probably one of the few. Actually, I don't even know if that's true, but I'm one of the few of people who listen to you regularly who couldn't give a rat's ass about comic books or sci-fi or any of that stuff.
Sure.
But I listen to it anyway. And it's the original canon that I'm actually interested in. So I'm Danish, and when you grow up in Israel. Yeah, when you grow up in Israel, there's you have Bible class. It's one of the things that you get at school, and Bible kind of stops probably around 500 BC, and it stops, and there's some arbitrary cutoff, and there's always an arbitrary cutoff. There has to be, because God isn't talking to us now, so obviously He stopped talking to us a while ago. And I don't know, maybe it was because I just wasn't interested in that kind of stuff that I never questioned it. But, there is a lot of interesting and actually very important history that happened in sort of the last few hundred years before the birth of Christ, and actually very sort of important for the Jewish people. But these are not included in the Bible, and the they're not part of the canon, so to speak. And it didn't. I never really wondered about it too much, but then, you know, the more I realized actually there is a world outside that actually talks about the New Testament, and there's other books that are part of what they would consider Old and New Testament, both, you know, to be considered canon. When they put together this entire Bible, why is it that they skipped over, you know, the what's known as the 400 years of silence, like between Malachi, you know, 400 and something years BC, and the Gospel of Matthew? There's nothing, even though there was a lot of, you know, very important things that had happened. And I'm sure, you know, and they talk in the Bible about you know, the various kings. I mean, there's an entire book dedicated, you know, to the kings of Israel and Judea. But sure, you know, they talk about the kings, and they talk about non-religious historical facts and events. Yet, you know, some of the more important facts and events that happened are just overlooked. And if you're going to create a New Testament, why not have it, you know, a continuous, you know, why not add those, and I don't know what the name is in English, but it's like called external books in Hebrew, I guess, whatever it is, but it's like whatever, let's call it external books for now.
So
right. So there are books that exist that do talk about these things. The Bible Together, they didn't put those in. They just started from whatever 0 BC or 50 BC or something like that. What's the process around that? Some books left out. If you can talk about that for a bit.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So awesome question. Yeah, I mean, so for people that don't know, the doctor, I do have a doctorate of divinity. Take that for what you will. And I do fancy myself a bit of a religious scholar, certainly a historian, armchair, I guess. But some people really, well, anyway. While not everybody digs so much the geeky canon, a lot of people definitely dig when I start talking about historical matters, and certainly some of the historical canon. And I like the way you phrase that, kind of the original canon, because I think the idea of canonicity in a lot of ways started actually with Torah or the Tanakh, or, you know, the Old Testament, whatever you want to call it. In fact, for me, I can't help but not wonder if my obsession, my personal obsession with like canonicity in comic books and Star Trek and Star Wars and all that actually comes from, you know, just like growing up learning about the Talmud and everything, and how important, you know, kind of canonicity can be, like what books are allowed, what books aren't, what's actually legit, what isn't, etc. So yeah, that all kind of fits in a way. But anyway, so you do have books written about this time, like you called the 400 Years of Silence. You do have books that are written during that time called, or well, theoretically they're written during that time, but they're called the Deuterocanonical books, or the Apocrypha by Christians. That's what they will call them. Now, Catholics actually don't have a problem with these books, and they include them in their Bible. If you buy a Catholic Bible, say like a Dewey Reams Bible, which is sort of their version of the King James, but it's based off of the Latin Vulgate. If you buy that, or even if you get, like, they had their own version of the Revised Standard Version, or Revised Standard Version. Yeah, that's what it is, right? The RSV, whatever. Anyway, you know, those are included in that, or they have the New Jerusalem Bible, all of those, and even the original King James from 1611. In fact, I'm not going to pull it down, but way up, for those that are watching the video, way up at the top, you can kind of see Duke Nukem here. There's one more shelf that goes all the way up. There's my old King James Bible, which is a facsimile of the 1611 version of the King James. And in that, it has the Apocrypha, where it has all of these books that talk about like the important events that you were mentioning, Daniel, which like the Maccabean revolt, and all of these other things, which actually have like huge importance to Jewish holidays. Like some of them are based on it. I mean, it's history that is a very big deal. Also, and as far as like why these books why Christians, I mean, it's understandable why Jews don't accept why the rabbis, I should say, don't accept these books. A lot of people don't realize that, like, no pun intended, and of all ironies, the book of Daniel, okay, which has to do with the prophet Daniel, I don't know if you're a prophet or not, but but the book of Daniel, that was the rabbinate at the time, or it would have been more the Sanhedrin, I suppose, but the rabbis of their day, when arguably, and there is huge arguments as to when actually what we have as far as the Torah, or what makes up the Tanakh, what makes up the Old Testament, how did that even get canonized? How did that get decided? What that became? There's some arguments that all of the books that are in the Torah weren't decided until even after the New Testament was finally figured out. I mean, and we base, or modern Jews base their what makes up the Tanakh, what makes up the Torah, on the Masoretic text, but that's like more of a medieval work. I mean, like, so, like, it's tough to say where any of this was even originally written, where it started from, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, so you have like later books like the book of Jonah, and the book of Daniel and some others that are considered kind of later works. These were debatable whether or not they were going to get put into Torah. In fact, the book of Daniel was considered so weird, and this is a very important abstract concept, the idea of something being too weird. The book of Daniel was considered so weird, they didn't want to include it, I think, because it just laid out some very strange stuff. A lot of these different visions, with the four beasts, or, what happened in the Babylonian captivity, which I imagine was kind of embarrassing, when you're coming off of this, or when you're dealing with like the Second Temple period, you don't want to really think about that. But the book of Daniel was just so popular amongst the Jews of that time, we're talking whatever, 4th, 5th century, BCE, that they had to, like, the rabbis would have had a revolt on their hands if the book of Daniel wasn't put in the central text of Judaism at that time. So there's books that are in Torah that might not have ever made it, that they would have been considered apocrypha or deuterocanonical or whatever, and it could have ended up just like a lot of these, 1st, 2nd, 3rd Maccabees, and there's some other books in that as well. So now when you get to the Council of Hippo, which ends up, and like the Nicene Council and everything, where you end up with these, Council of Carthage, all those, where Augustine himself, St. Augustine, this really important figure within Christianity, where he attended those, like, he made it very clear that no, the Apocrypha should be in these things. And before that, or should be considered part of the Christian Bible. Okay. And before that, you had the Nicene Council where everything was getting decided. And there's a lot of books, like there's the book of Enoch that isn't in Torah, or it isn't in the Old Testament. It isn't in the New Testament. There are countries around the world where it is accepted, like in Ethiopia. The Ethiopic Christian Church does consider the book of Enoch to be canonical. But anyway, there's a lot of these texts, and there's a lot of other books like that could have been part of the Christian Bible, like the Apocalypse of Paul, instead of just like the Revelation, as it's revealed to John. All these different books, some of them, these councils, the Nicene Council, or these councils of Christian, of church fathers and elders, would come together and they pretty much say, okay, look, what happened in that is just too fucking weird. We can't have that in the Bible, because people are going to come out with there's going to be some wacky doctrines that are going to come out of this, and we can't have it. And pretty much what happens is when you fast forward to 15th, 16th century, CE, with Christian history, and you end up with Martin Luther and the entire Protestant Reformation and everything. They more or less come to the conclusion that these deuterocanonical books, like the books of Maccabees and some others, they have some, and some of them do have some really weird shit. They have some stuff in there that bolsters the Catholic Church's claim, and we think that these aren't actually the Word of God. It's nice poetry or something, but it's really not the Word of God, and so we're not going to accept these books as part of the canon. But they still get used, just like maybe one of the most important and one with some of the most breadth of that time, historians, that being Flavius Josephus, who was a contemporary of Christ, if Christ actually lived. His Antiquities of the Jews and some of his other works are, they're not the Word of God, but they're very popular among Christians to explain what exactly was going on at that time and to talk about it. But again, it's not the word of God. Like some of the deuterocanonical books that are there, like there's a situation where like a person touches the body of, I think, Elisha, not Elijah, but Elisha, and that like the person is healed or comes back to life or something like that. I mean, it's a very, and then there's a bunch of like seraphim that get involved. Like that's where you find out about the character of Raphael and all that. I mean, it really, a lot of it does read very weird. Maybe not so weird as say the Book of Enoch, but it does get exceptionally strange. But that's really it. I think that's really the reason why those books aren't included in Protestant Bibles. Again, they are in Catholic Bibles, but why it's not included in Protestant Bibles is because it's just considered too strange, and too much of it they feel bolstered the Catholic position, which they were trying to get away from. And they were already kind of contentious books anyway. It wasn't until, like I said, until, you get to, the Council of Carthage and the Council of Hippo, where Augustine finally says, no, these are legit. These are the word of God. You're putting them in there, blah, 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 blah. But, Protestants aren't going to just take some Catholic saint on his word. So that's pretty much what the deal is with that. There are, like you said, there are books that cover it. As far as why they're not widely known or recognized, that I think that's just the reason, is just that it's considered too weird. Like the Book of Enoch. Well, here's something. Actually, even in the Old Testament, there are a lot of books of the Bible that are referenced that we don't have, or at least we don't think we have anything remotely like the autographs, which would be the original. There's the Book of Jasher that is mentioned in the Book of Joshua. I think in the book of, it's either in Deuteronomy or the Book of Exodus, where they talk about the book is called the Book of the Wars of the Lord. What the hell are those? We don't know. And part of this comes from also, like, a lot of people don't realize the order in which the books are in the Bible are not the order necessarily that they're written. Like the oldest book in the Bible is actually the Book of Job. Like we know that. And that's part of the reason I find it to be one of the more fascinating books in the Bible. But people just think, oh, it all started with Genesis. Well, not exactly. In fact, you could get into Pan-Babylonianism, where all that kind of came from anyway. And then there's a whole slew of other stories you can get into where it appears that the Jews actually lost the Bible and finally found it again. But when you start reading into like First and Second Kings, but yeah, I mean, people don't understand how the book came together. And so I think that creates a lot of confusion in maybe what's missing and what's not there. And they just, sadly, they don't question it like you are, Daniel. And they just say, well, it's the word of God. And that's how it came together, when it was a lot of it was very arbitrary and down to nothing but taste, as far as what actually gets included. So does that answer your question, Daniel, or you got more on that?
It's a Pandora's box, so I'll let it be. I'll let it be. No, there are definitely some interest. Like, I mean, the Book of Enoch and various others have actually, or at least in part, been in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and you could find a whole bunch of whatever you call them, the non-canonical books that survived. I never questioned Daniel being in it or not being in it, because he is a prophet, and the Nevi'im section would have the prophets.
Right.
If I were to think about it myself, and it's like, okay, well, here you've got the various obviously things that like Josephus Flavius would have written, like that is not the word of God, because it's a man writing a history book. So that makes sense why something like that won't be in it. But the books that are supposedly anonymous, I guess there's always something along the lines of, well, this is just a secular recounting of history versus the word of God. But it's interesting what you point out of different tastes, or what the things within the books, what that could lead from how would it impact the established religious institution that was there at the time. But actually, now as you were talking, the thing that made me most interesting, because you were saying like there would be a revolt if a certain book was included and not included. it's interesting to have been alive at the time that people may or may not have known that the canonization process was taking place. And if these books were popular at the time, and obviously they were popular enough for the authors of various books that did make it in to know about and to reference, it's just interesting to it would have been interesting to be a fly on the wall at the time, going in a time machine and seeing, well, what did people know about and talk about, and what books, what literature was part of their culture. And It's not necessarily what we know to have existed now. So I don't know. It's all very fascinating, and not necessarily a question, but just an interesting.
Yeah, no, it is
topic.
Interesting. In fact, I think a lot of reasons that a lot of works from that time frame, that's very specific, like say 400 to 500 years. I think a lot of it may have to do with Judaism was dealing with Israel, whatever, it was dealing with a very real separation of thought at the time, like a real schism, where you had the Sadducees and the Pharisees. You had the oh, this is terrible. Their names are escaping me. It begins with an E, and I know it supremely well. But anyway, they're the ones that buried actually the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I can't think of them at the moment. But I know somebody's yelling at the audio right now. So, but it's interesting that you had that going on, and a part of me wonders if just to keep like those alternative voices from being out there, that there's just like this veritable ban on writings from that time, because that writing would be seen as less pure because it doesn't come from a singular ideological persuasion, even within Judaism itself, which I think is, well, I mean, that's interesting, but a lot of it just chalks down, that chalks up to authoritarianism in that sense. And yeah, it is pretty wild. I wish people like had a better grasp, or even like that, like you just mentioned, because in the Tanakh, the books are they're categorized by style, not so much by any kind of chronology or anything along those lines. Most people don't even realize that that's a thing, like it's so, I mean, I even remember when my parents converted to Christianity, like they made it really important. You need to memorize the exact order of the books in the Bible. Like they wanted you to know it. And like, this is, even the way that the books were ordered was a holy thing. And it's like, wait a minute, but I know these books are ordered differently in this other version that I have over here in my little JPS Bible, it's so much of it is really it's taste and authoritarianism, and it's really crazy. So
love it. Cool. Thank you very much.
Yeah, man. No, thanks for the question. It was a doozy. So, certainly something I could talk about many, many times over. There's so many things to get into. And like, I didn't even touch on the Septuagint, which is a very interesting, like that's something that, well, one could get into a long story about the Septuagint, because I think that's like the closest we have to any kind of autograph, but even the modern rabbis like wouldn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole, because there's some very interesting translations where God is like the terms for God, Elohim, and some others are converted to, translated to in the Greek, which Septuagint is just the Greek Old Testament. That's the idea, but it was chartered in Alexandria, before Christ. And in that you have where like God is referenced in the plural, which Christians love that, because they say, oh, you see, the Trinity's always been a thing.
Elohim is plural.
Well, right. The word itself is plural.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, but when it translates it over, it translates it directly to a plural term in Greek. And I know for a fact rabbis don't like that. Like they're not happy about that fact, even though again Elohim does have. I mean, because what a rabbi would say is that Elohim is referencing not like three gods in one. It's not representing some kind of hypostatic union, but it's actually saying, hey, you're this is like the different aspects of God. Like this is God's
it's everything in the world. Yeah.
Yeah,
it cannot be singular, but it's not three. Yeah.
Right. So as to where the Christians, based upon the Septuagint, which would be very influential for the Vulgate, which would be the original major Christian Bible, of course, in Latin. They would take that as like, see, we're right. You guys are hiding the truth, and there's a lot of other things. There's stuff that gets added in to, like, especially in the book of Daniel, which also makes it a little more contentious, as well as the book of Esther that gets added into the Septuagint, that makes it into the Vulgate and is still considered, like, the Catholic Bible didn't just add the Apocrypha. The Catholic Bible also added in entire chapters, particularly into Esther and Daniel, because in the book of Esther, it's weird. And boy, someday I'd love to just talk about the book of Esther for a while, because this is a fucked up little book of the Bible, because the book of Esther never actually really mentions God. And so that's why they added in the chapters, because they needed to put in some prayers to the Lord in that thing, because otherwise it's like, wait a minute, is this even a Christian or Jewish text? Not that the Jews added it in, but a lot of people point at, this gets into conspiracy theories, because a lot of people point at the book of Esther and say, this is what the Jews do in every civilization that they go to. This is their New World Order plan. So the book of Esther is like this really contentious thing, and the Catholics make it a little more palatable, quite frankly, than even, the Masoretic text would. And it's, anyway, but that's a whole much longer story. So, okay, let's check on the YouTube chat and let's see if we can move on to some other things. And nothing in the YouTube chat. They must just be completely enamored with the conversation that I'm having now. But I did get some further pre-listed questions that I will get to. So, and again, folks, look, like, I'm totally fine with talking history. I'll talk religion. We'll talk the geeky stuff. I think the last Hangout Q&A, live Hangout Q&A, was all geek stuff, and that's fine. And we can talk tech too. That's totally okay. So we're about 4:30. So we're about halfway through this episode. Let's go into some of again, if you want to ask questions in the YouTube chat, you're welcome to. Otherwise, I'll get to these pre-sent in questions. Okay, there we go. So let's see. The Last Jedi has been released. Have you watched it again, and what do you think of it? Okay, I don't want to spend a whole ton of time on this, because I do an entire Star Wars show where people can listen to me talk about Star Wars, and I have Robin with me, who he's just pure dynamite. People loved it when he was on. The first one that we did for February, we're doing it again late March. It'll definitely be like late March. Yes, I've actually I've watched The Last Jedi twice since it came out, because it was up on what we call the public library, wink wink, a few days ago. So I watched it twice again, and I don't know, I don't feel any different about it, because I enjoyed it when it came out. I still enjoy it. And that's really all I'm going to say on it right now. We're going to do Robin and I will do a more in-depth review when we do the Star Wars update this month, and people can hear about that. But yeah, I mean, my views didn't change. I didn't really notice something that I never noticed before. I've been listening to the audiobook, of which we will also talk about on the Star Wars update. I've been listening to the audiobook of The Last Jedi, which it's called The Last Jedi Expanded Edition. Like, they're making it a point that there is a bunch of extra stuff in the book, and there is. So far, there is. I think I'm about halfway through, and it's interesting. None of it necessarily adds anything to what I got out of watching The Last Jedi. But as much as again, I didn't really complain about The Last Jedi so much as I was annoyed that they fucked up shit, I think, with Snoke and with Rey. But otherwise, I liked it. And my main problem, as I said in my Star Wars review back in December on Sovryn Tech, I said, it was like, my main problem is that you had this entire industry of, YouTube vloggers and podcasters. And I mean, even I would get into the game when I thought that Disney actually had a plan. You find out they didn't, who were saying, oh, Snoke is this, or Rey is that, Rey's parents are this, or this guy's Ezra, or this is blah, 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 blah. And that's really my main problem, and still my main problem with a lot of the shit. But again, that'll all be on the Star Wars update. So, yeah, I've like I said, I watched it twice again, and yeah, my opinion hasn't really changed a bit at all. So, okay. Here's something. I got a lot of, I'm going to talk about this more on this week's Sovryn Tech Prime episode, because I get a lot of reaction on things, but sometimes I get like a deluge, no pun intended to our previous topic. I get a flood of responses on things. One of the ones that I did was when I was talking about post scarcity on this past episode of Sovryn Tech, which I guess it was episode 268 of Sovryn Tech Prime. And we were talking about Amazon, which I also talked about it when the lovely and hyper intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy was on previously. We talked about it there too. And I'll go during the Q&A segment on episode 269, I'll probably talk about it more, but I just want to clarify that, I'm not saying post scarcity is a good thing. I'm not saying that post scarcity is possible. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm saying there's people out there who think that it is, and they have varying definitions of that. And there's some comments from Sovryn Tech listeners that I'll be reading where they clarify things and they bring up points to me and whatever, and we'll talk about that. Okay. But please don't confuse me that I'm saying that it's something that is possible, that it's going to happen, et cetera, et cetera. I'm saying it's what they're trying for. I'm saying they think that it can happen, and maybe that's a sign of their hubris and stupidity. Okay. That, I don't know. Well, anyway, I think I say this every month now. I lost some patrons, and I don't know if they flipped out because they thought I was advocating for post scarcity, which I made it very clear, and I've made it clear over and over again that I'm not. In fact, even when I'm talking about post scarcity, I always am very careful to use the term like pseudo post scarcity, which is similar maybe to what like Kevin Carson would be talking about as far as what that actually ends up looking like. Which, if you haven't read Kevin Carson's work, I totally recommend doing that. This is one of those anarchists that are doing it right. And they are not Zeitgeist Kevin Carson is not Zeitgeist Movement or Venus Project or, any of that kind of horseshit. So, okay. Just wanted to get that out there. If somebody was confused and you thought that I was arguing for post scarcity, no, I'm saying there's people who believe it's possible and they're trying for it. That's what I said. That's it. Told you about Ernie being on. Okay. So, speaking of also something that is released from episode 268, because I did the big review of the Area X trilogy, and I said probably by the time you heard that the movie Annihilation, that Ellen and I enjoyed, that we went to go see, that would be available on the public library. Wink, wink. It is. So just in case you want to know, you can go check that out if you want, and then listen to my reviews and see what you think. I also happen to have watched that again. So. Anyway, okay, here we go. I've heard you recently say you are polyamorous. Is this something you think you were born with? Rather, do you think it's genetic, or is it something that's learned? What do you think about the accusation that it's just an excuse to have sex with as many people as possible? Oh. It seems to be very trendy today. Okay. And again, feel free. Anybody can ask questions in the YouTube chat if they want. While I'm going through these, I have a few of these that were preloaded that I can either do now or I'll save them for Wednesday Q&As. So, okay. First off, it's not just trendy today. It's been trendy for a long, long time. I've been in New Hampshire come October 2018. I will have been in New Hampshire for 7 years. And polyamory was a big deal 7 years ago here. It was a big fucking deal. And honestly, in the liberty movement, or maybe more particularly in the New Hampshire liberty movement, which I think is an important one, like there are various trends that go through, like the paleo diet was really big 7 years ago here. And also now the keto diet is the really big thing amongst the porcupines, as as free staters are often called, or not just free staters, but the New Hampshire Liberty Movement participants, shall we say. There's trends and things that go through, sure, but polyamory has been a big deal for a long, long time. It's not just trendy now. I don't know if it's just spread out maybe to your neck of the woods. I'm not sure exactly who was asking this, but I don't know if it, because I have multiple people kind of with the same name. That's why I'm not sure which one of you are or where you live. Maybe it's just becoming a thing out where you are, or maybe in the part of the internet that you frequent, it's just becoming a thing. But let me just make it clear that it's been around for a good long while. I don't, well, like I said, I know I get some really personal questions these days. I've been engaged in polyamorous relationships for almost 20 years, like just shy of 20 years, before the term polyamory was so much of a thing. Like before, like I even, there wasn't like a name for it. We didn't know there was really a name for it. A lot of it was just based off of, I read Stranger in a Strange Land, and I also knew for myself before I even read Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein, or like Moon is a Harsh Mistress is another one that people point at when they talk about how, well, this idea of having multiple lovers at the same time isn't necessarily new. It's been around for quite a few decades, if not thousands of years, right? You can certainly read about your fair share of that in the Torah. And so before I had read any of those books and things like that, like I kind of knew. So first off, I've always had female friends. Most of my friends have generally been female. Some of my best friends have been male, but by and large, for whatever reason that it ends up happening, I don't know. I generally have always found myself pretty much hanging around, a bunch of women, again, as friends, because I personally, and I know some people disagree, I personally think, that men and women can absolutely be friends, without it being sexual or anything like that. That kind of thing can happen. But I always knew, and so a couple points here. I always knew that I was capable of loving one friend, or, maybe start developing feelings for them, whatever, while having the same loving feeling, say, for an actual girlfriend or for another friend or something like that. Like, I've just always known that my heart wasn't something that necessarily had to belong to only one person. Okay. So, let's see. There's a couple things in the YouTube chat, so I want to get to that. Let's see. I think it's a great thing to the extent that it's possible. I'm guessing that means post-scarcity or polyamory. Either one. Polyamory is the post-scarcity of love, I think. That's my comment. And no, I don't know. Then someone says, I think it's possible that we're all born polyamorous. This is in the YouTube chat. Like we're all born anarchists. Gotta fly, catch the rest in the audio piece. All right, right on, man. Yeah, so, okay, so there's somebody who is voting for, they think that we're all born polyamorous. But I want to touch more on the question. So I've always kind of known that I could love people equally. And actually, I think everybody kind of knows that because they have children, and usually they have more than one, or not usually, but often enough they have more than one. And would one say they love one child more than the other? No, you'd either never say that, or maybe you just don't want to admit that actually you do love one child more than the other. I don't know what's going on for you, but most people would say, no, I love all of my children equally. Okay, so your heart is capable of deep levels of love for multiple people. That's just, I mean, I don't think that that's a strange statement. But then they say once sex gets involved, suddenly, oh no, that's actually not possible. Well, now here's part two of what I was going to say, is for me, when I want to really call somebody friend, like when I really want to use that term, okay, and I mean somebody like that I have a real friendship with, okay, or if I want to, maybe more particularly, if I want to use the term best friend, it can be, and I think I've said this before on Sovryn Tech in the past, or I probably said it on Pork Therapy years ago on Stephanie's old show, when she and I would co-host that a lot. Of course, that's how you end up with Sex and Science Hour, is because of our time on Pork Therapy. But I have a hard time, like where does friend and lover kind of begin and end? That's a tough call to make. Right. Because Stephanie, like Stephanie's, and there's, a couple people in my life that I call best friend. Stephanie's my best friend, but she's also my lover, and she's also so much more. I mean, there's not even words to describe our relationship. And so, yeah, it can be very tough to say like where does, okay. I mean, because once you add in sexuality, now that's the thing, like, do you consider sexuality some kind of sacred act to God? Well, then then that definition of, of where love can't include multiple people that you're having sex with. If it's some kind of sacred thing to you, well, then obviously that's different. But what about the people that don't hold it as sacred under God? I mean, I still consider sex to be very sacred, but that doesn't mean that it's not sacred under some God, some Sky Daddy's rules. Okay. Like what, I get it if you hold it, like I say, if you hold it sacred under some kind of laws or something, okay, but if not, and people don't have to, at least if you're a libertarian or an anarchist, I hope you don't think people have to, or maybe you do, because you don't actually want anarchism, you just don't want there to be a state, but you want everybody else to act like they've always acted, and you want everything to look like the 1950s. I mean, that's fine, I guess. Well, it's not fine, but I get that that's how some people think about what anarchism is and what libertarianism is. It's just the 1950s without a state. That's what you want. You want women to stay in the kitchen, barefoot and everything. And okay. So anyway, some of us don't think that way. I wish I could say it was a lot of us. I think it's more than I give credit for, but whatever. I'm digressing here. Okay. Let me get back on the question, but bottom line being is that, yeah, for me, it's tough to say like where those things begin and end. It's very tough for me to call that, because sex really look, folks, sex is a part of, it's a biological function that co-evolved. It doesn't have a singular purpose. It has multiple purposes. It's not just for procreation. It's also a social act. Okay. So sex can just be a social act. Sex can just be sex for some people. I get that there's people who it becomes very difficult that once they have sex that they feel like a special connection with people and they can't just let it go and they want it to be something more just because they had sex. I understand everybody's different. Everybody has different, tolerances and tastes. Where those tolerances and tastes and preferences come from, nature versus nurture. Well, that leads back into what this original question was, which is, do you think it's genetic or is it something that's learned? I am open to, well, what the person in the YouTube chat said, that we're born that way. We're born polyamorous. I'm open to that. I am open to the idea that if we're not all born that way, some of us are born that way. I'm also open to the fact that it could be learned, that people could, what's the term I'm looking for? People could temper their jealousy and envy. And maybe, they could handle having a multitude of relationships at the same time. I mean, most humans go through their life with a multitude of relationships. They're just not at the same time, right? It's what they call serial monogamy. You just keep having, the same, you never just fall in love with one person, but you just don't fall in love with more than one person at the same time. But you do fall in love with multiple people, which again points at the fact that, well, why can't you fall in love with multiple people at the same time? But whatever. Okay. That's that damned logic, you got to get that out of the way. So I'm really open to, I don't have like a definitive answer on that I'm not going to come out and say, oh, it's genetic, or I'm not going to come out and say, oh, that's learned. Now, like the YouTube chat person said, yeah, I think everybody's born an anarchist. And I will definitely say that all people are born atheists. I have no problem making that claim. I know I have a lot of Christian listeners. I have a lot of religious, spiritual listeners. And you know how I feel about this, so I'm not shocking you. At least I hope that doesn't shock you, because I've said far worse in the past. But I do think everybody's born an anarchist and an atheist. I don't know if I'm willing to go so far as to say that everybody's born polyamorous. Just because... Well, and this is something I've only lightly ever touched on, and I think it was years ago. If you want to look into this, it's called the explorer gene. And this is a genetic trait that some humans have, others don't. And it lends itself arguably to what people would define as promiscuity. I wouldn't say that in the negative, though some people would use it as pejorative. And a lot of other things. But it's a very important, I don't know if mutation is the right word, but I'll say mutation, because they call it the explorer gene because they attribute it to why there's just some humans who just can't, not wanderlust, but who just can't sit still and just have to just keep going, just have this like crazy drive and everything. I recommend looking more into it. Like I said, it's called the explorer's gene. I won't spend a whole ton of time talking about it here because I want to get to another question. So there's my answer on that. And yes, I'm polyamorous. Absolutely. And like I said that earlier, I mean, I've been engaged in polyamorous relationships, and those take a lot of different shapes and sizes, but I've been engaged in them pretty much, except for the time that I was married. I've been engaged in them my whole life. I get told by you, the Sovryn Tech listeners, that I'm a very happy person. So I guess it's not hurting me. But to answer, maybe that goes into the next one. What do you think about the accusation that it's just an excuse to have sex with as many people as possible? Yeah. I think there's a lot of people where that is absolutely a fact. And I think that's why also partly it was very trendy, particularly, or where it was trendy in New Hampshire quite a few years ago. In fact, there's still, or at least to my mind, and here's a little inside baseball, inside New Hampshire for you, inside the Free State Project, behind enemy lines. Here's a little thing for you. I think when most people come here married, or at least a couple of years ago, this still used to be true. I don't necessarily engage with as many people as I used to years ago, but at least up until a couple of years ago, this was still true. If you move to New Hampshire and you're married, that marriage is over in 6 months, and people are going to go their separate ways, partly because of this polyamory or whatever, or what I've called polyfuckery, meaning that it's not really polyamory. It's just people suddenly have like this new pond where they may be a very big fish that they weren't a big fish before. And now they want to bigger, better deal, quote unquote, better they want to get with. That I've seen that be very commonplace with people that have come here, men and women, both sides, and even the third side. So yeah, that happens, but that doesn't mean, just because, with like a lot of other things, just because something has within it, say, bad actors or people that maybe abuse the term or abuse the idea, doesn't mean that the idea itself is wrong. Doesn't mean that the concept or the abstract is wrong. Okay. Because there is nothing wrong with polyamory at all. Some people want to get funny and say, well, the term is a problem because it's like a mixture of like Greek and Latin or something, but whatever. Who the fuck cares? Okay. But yes, people do engage in that. But again, there's plenty of people, myself included and others. I mean, where they engage in genuine multitude of loving relationships. And it's a in my opinion, it's a fucking beautiful thing. It's awesome. I love it. And there are people who, and even if you're polyamorous, you can still, go out and have fun and just have sex with other people as well. You don't have to, because I have a problem with that. If people want to wave the banner of polyamory just so that they can go have sex, look, just go have sex. Stop trying to you don't have to justify it ex post facto. Just do it and admit that you're a hedonist and a sexual creature and you want to go have a good time, and go have the good time. You don't have to have an ideology behind you to do that. It's being human. So anyway, I know some of that was kind of inconclusive in that, do I think it's genetic or is it something that's learned? Like I said, I could see it being both. I really, a little bit of both. I don't know. I'm really, really open to that. There's the book that was popular a few years ago, Sex at Dawn, made a career for Christopher Ryan. I think he argues that everybody's polyamorous, even though he says there's nothing wrong with monogamy, but he argues that evolutionarily everybody's polyamorous. Again, I'm not going to go that far. But because keep in mind, okay, you have, a few 100,000 years ago, you had a multitude of different types of, the genus Homo, right? Of Homo sapiens. You had Neanderthals. Okay. You had the Denisovans. You had, there's so many different types, and we keep finding more of these different types of humans, for the broad term, that, that co-evolved with each other. Okay. And they're all different. There was an article today in phys.org talking about how remarkably compassionate Neanderthals were by, just by evolution, the claim was. And it's an interesting story. I might cover it in the future Sovryn Tech. But that's what got them so far ahead, and what kept them going was actually their levels of compassion, their levels of empathy. So is empathy genetic? Now there's a story going around about research about, genetics and empathy, and is empathy a genetic trait? That's a whole other thing too. I'm not going there. Okay. There's people far, far more interested and smarter than I in that sort of thing, that could talk about that. But my point being is that there's no reason that even within Homo sapiens sapiens, that there couldn't be subspecies of humans that have just varying different traits, like the explorer's genes or something like that. And this isn't getting to like RK selection, none of that bullshit, because everybody's lives are valid. When people start talking about like R versus K, they're trying to justify why a certain part of humanity needs to be wiped out. I'm not making that kind of claim at all. Humans are humans. Okay, regardless of any mutations and whatever else is going on for them, who gives a shit? This isn't some kind of like racialism or anything like, or racism or something like that. But just that I think there's the human condition is so broad, varied, and I always say or sometimes I'll say dare I say quantum, that I think there's a whole spectrum of possibilities that can exist even with just the human species alone, and none is less valid than the other. Let it be, rock and roll. So, anyway, let's see what else do we have here? Do we got any other comments? Let's see. Okay, the person in the YouTube chat said I'm talking about post scarcity. By the way, I think I'm a bit behind with the live video. Yeah, no worries. So okay, that was in reference to the comment. It's a great thing to the extent that it's possible. Yeah, I think that's like what Kevin Carson would say. So there. I hope what I said made some degree of sense as far as polyamory goes. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I guess we'll go to this. I have one last question here. What does your morning routine look like? Somehow I imagine you never sleeping, but what does your first hour look like? So okay, I actually, oddly enough, I have a story about this, about like morning routines and everything that I've saved. And when I have just the amazing Ellen and Stephanie on the show in a couple weeks here, we're going to cover it. We're going to talk about it. And the reason that I want to talk about it with them is because I really see the three of us as like, we're real go-getters. Like, I mean, we do a lot and we push really hard and try and make things happen. And go after opportunities and everything, and just work on like, kind of personal development and self-improvement and things like that, like all the time. So Stephanie is just one of the hardest working, busiest women you'll ever meet. Ellen is, just hardcore, she's going all the time. And certainly, I kind of don't know when I'm not working, but so I'll talk about it with them, but since we got a few minutes here, just wrapping up, I will go ahead and answer this. What does your morning routine look like? Somehow I imagine you never sleeping, but what does your first hour look like? So as far as sleep, I usually only sleep like 6 hours, sometimes less, sometimes maybe 7. But in general, I usually only sleep about 6 hours. That's one of the ways that I am able to fit in all of the things I do within a singular day. That is not a good thing. Let me put that out there right now. That is very far from a good thing. That, I really should be sleeping a whole hell of a lot more. And it's something I need to work on for a variety of reasons. I mean, there's mental, there's plenty of research to show that, like, if you don't sleep, your brain pretty much starts eating itself. That is unacceptable to me. My brain is my most important thing, and I've been working on it for my whole life. So I don't want anything to happen to that. So need to solve that. The other thing is that, muscle growth, my gains, my gains suffer when a person doesn't get enough sleep. The more sleep you get, it almost seems the better. So that's something that I also want to improve upon. So it's another reason that I want to make sure I'm getting plenty of sleep. So for both of those reasons, that needs to happen. So I'm not necessarily recommending to people that, you should only sleep 6 hours a night or something like that. And, and then you have your morning routine, which I'll talk about. But real quick, like I appreciate a lot of you feel free to keep asking them. Okay. That's fine. I'm noticing a ton of like really personal questions, which granted I do a relationship Rhombus show, which I suppose those are totally personal questions that people want to ask me and Stephanie. And maybe we'll have other people on that show in the future, but, like that's fine. Just don't, please don't think like that I have it all figured out. Okay. Don't put me up on any kind of pedestal. Like I not that I necessarily think you're doing that by asking these, but just please be careful. I don't, what works for me may not work for you. And I don't know everything. That's why I try to surround myself with, really intelligent women, really intelligent people. And I don't. So anyway, okay. So what does your first hour look like? So my first hour, and it depends if Stephanie, depending on who wakes up at the same time, when we get up, if that happens, if I'm alone, which a lot of times I'm getting up before everybody else. If I'm alone, I will, like, I get up, I make tea. I love to make coffee, but not everybody likes the smell of coffee. So usually I'll make tea. I make like that high calf coconut tea from Republic of Tea. They're not a sponsor, by the way, but I'll make that tea, and then I'll get that going. And while that's brewing, usually I'll do a couple of things. I will do my morning oil pull, which is where you take coconut oil and you have it in your mouth for like 20 minutes or whatever, and that's great for oral health. And I do that while I'm waiting for the tea to finish brewing and everything. And then I'll let the tea brew. I will meditate for about 15 to 20 minutes or so, and I'll have my tea. I'll sit down. Often enough, like I really, really like my morning to be very leisurely. And if it's not terribly cold outside, or even if it is terribly cold, I sit outside for a little bit, no screens, no audio, nothing, just looking outside at the world. And that's it, just sitting there with my tea. And that's the meditation kind of gets you set up for that anyway. But I like my senses to kind of like activate slowly going into the morning and just think about things. And then I have really, like, I get a lot of really great creative thoughts and impulses and other things, and just kind of assess like even what happened the day before and whatever, that'll happen during that time. And it primes me pretty good, I think, for the rest of the day and what I want to actually get done for the rest of the day. And then I will, so again, this is all pretty much my first hour. And then maybe I'll start looking at notifications after all of that. Often while I'm oil pulling, this is before I meditate. This is the second thing I do while I'm doing the oil pull. I put on just some kind of like, whether it's and I'm dead serious, the theme from Doom, Doom, though I would also put on the theme from Dune, Dune. Both are very powerful. I'll put on some power music, or I'll put on like Aloe Black, King is Born, or I'll put on, hell, I used to wake up to, Judas Priest. I used to wake up with them, with Painkiller playing, right? So I'll, those are like, I'll have some kind of power music going when I first wake up, and that gets me charged up, and then I can kind of break it down a little bit. I usually don't play anything like too heavy first thing in the morning, but just something that kind of gets me into action, and then I slow it down. And then I, when I start actually working for the day, seeing what's going on with clients and everything, or taking care of Sovryn Tech stuff, then that hustle, that feeling of hustle and get going and get as much done in as short amount of time as possible, that's when that really kicks in. So yeah, I really do like to take my time, waking up. And hell, sometimes I start dancing in the morning. I mean, that'll happen too. In many ways, it depends on how I feel about things, that morning. If I'm like particularly tired, well, then the power music doesn't necessarily kick in the way that I thought. Instead, I'll open up listening to Richard Marx or something. That's Richard, not Carl. So yeah, that's kind of what my morning, that's a very basic rundown of what my morning looks like. But this is a subject that'll come up again in the future, because there was a really interesting article about what people do as far as how they, what their mornings look like what are the mornings of successful people, which of course that's a very subjective term. So, yeah, that's my first hour, meditation, tea, sitting outside, taking a look at the world, and the real world, not the one online, because that's mostly fake. Yeah, there you go. So, all right, we're about at the 5 o'clock. Nothing in the YouTube live chat. So, like I said, I know this episode was kind of short notice. I announced that it'd be coming up either Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, but I didn't announce that it'd actually be Tuesday until like late Monday night. So I didn't expect a whole lot of things to come in ahead of time for that. Or even like that people would be able to make it with their schedule. And that's totally understandable. Do continue to contact me. You can either PM me on Patreon or however you want to get in touch with me, and let me know, like, I'm trying to get a general consensus of when the YouTube chat is best for most people. Some people have let me know, but the others, let me know when exactly is the best time for you. Or of course, you're welcome to always preload questions. You can send them in to me. You want me to talk about on the live Hangout, or you could even like comment on the live Hangout post for when, for the post that comes out that day that gives you the links for it. And then I can find the questions there as well, and I can answer them here. But wow, pretty broad ranging conversation. A lot of people really enjoyed. I released the 2 books, the Mana Machine as well as the Kabbalah Decoded. I released those to the world, and that was, a lot of people I actually have some metrics. There was a lot of downloads for that, and it's growing, and I'm honored because you can share those wherever you want. Some people asked if there were going to be any other rare books that I was going to be releasing, that I'd be releasing PDFs of books that you can't get any other way, that are just, either expensive or prohibitive to get your hands on. I have been, and I talked about this on the Sovryn Tech Prime episode, I have been getting a lot of my books professionally scanned. And the rarer ones, I'll probably be releasing more. I'm not going to tell you which ones I'll be releasing, but I'll probably release more. And it's part of the reason I did it. I mean, the reason I had physical copies of these books was because I knew there's no way they're ever going to be an ebook. And so, like I said, I had to take I had to take matters into my own hands and get them out there to people. Or get them out there to where they can be disseminated and people can check it out. So I have a lot of books. I mean, I've actually been working on this for months, where these have been getting by a company. They've been getting professionally scanned with OCR, the whole thing, and that way I have them for my own collection. But then also, I can put them out there for people to get their hands on, because I mean, really, it's bullshit that this stuff doesn't get turned into ebooks, and we know Google has them, but Google won't release them. And I mean, I get why. There's, legal concerns and blah, blah, blah. I understand it, but fuck it. If Google won't do it, I will. But the ones that I released, I mean, they're ones that I don't even think Google would ever do. I think Google has, like, I think you can kind of do a search on the Mana Machine within Google Books, but like Kabbalah Decoded, I don't think they have. Just like I don't think they have Spaceships of Ezekiel, though I think Spaceships of Ezekiel, somebody already released a PDF of that. I don't think that's one I have to do. But yeah, I will be releasing more of those, and also I'll let you know on a little hint, because your patrons, you'll be getting access to this first. I've already written short fiction for the Star Trek Erotic Audio Theater. And a lot of exciting stuff going on with that. I know there's a bunch of projects that I need to actually like put out there, finish up and deliver. And this is just like adding one more onto the pile. But this one I think is really important. This one I think could help really expand the scope of Sovryn Tech more so than a lot of the more insular projects that I've been working on for some time. So, but I do have short fiction that I've been writing for that I will be releasing on Patreon, but it's not just a Patreon perk, because it will also be released in the Sovryn Tech newsletter for March. But I'm not exactly sure which day I want to release that, but I'll be putting that out so you can get at least an introduction to the characters that you'll be experiencing in the Star Trek Erotic Audio Theater. Like I had the response I've gotten from that. A lot of people are really excited about this, and they want it to happen really bad. And they want to work with it. And we're talking about like some people that are like production level style people that were really excited at the whole concept. And part of me I'll admit it, there's a part of me that wants to like really go full bore and get this out before someone else does it. You know what I mean? Before someone beats me to the punch. Like, I don't want to, obviously I don't believe in intellectual property whatsoever, but there is something to being first. And you're either first or best, or you're both. And I would like to be both, as far as like Star Trek audio theater goes, that's done by fans. And I think I am not uniquely talented, but particularly talented to be able to deliver it. And a lot of other people have told me the same thing. Like Ellen said, Brian, you're the only person that could do this, that could really pull this off. And, Stephanie said the same, and a lot of other people just so excited about it. So this is something I might be ramping up and concentrating on, just shifting, kind of focus towards that a little bit more, just let you know what's going on the inside and to fill out this time. But that's it. Let me see anything else in YouTube live chat. That is all. Thank you to everybody who participated in our March live hangout. I love doing this. I'd almost be tempted. I was thinking about this earlier today. I'm almost tempted to have the Wednesday Q&As always be a live hangout, but I don't know. I don't want to promise that. I don't know that's something that could logistically work out, but I really enjoyed this format, including when it's just questions being lobbed at me from the YouTube live chat. I think that's really cool and talking about everything there. So, okay. That's it for this month's for March. You've got a whole ton of other Patreon content coming out. There's some surprises. There is the Relationship Rhombus show should actually be out in the next few days. And because I know we'll be recording it here shortly, got some great questions from that. You can still get in questions for the Relationship Rhombus show if you want. Star Trek update, I have it confirmed. You're going to have a great Star Trek update this month. Star Wars update's going to be phenomenal. Me and Robin talking, it's probably a pretty important one because we'll be talking a lot of Last Jedi and other things. And of course, there will be, like I said, there's going to be other Patreon content too. I know I just kind of listed off some of the geeky stuff and the stuff that doesn't necessarily have to do with tech. But, again, if you want something, ask me and I'll put it out there. Just ask me and I can talk about it. And you as patrons, you're paying for this in a real way. So let me know what content you want. Okay. And tell me, and I will make it happen as best as I can. So there we go. That's it for the March live Q&A hangout. Other great stuff to come out very soon. Woo! I will see you on the other side.